Germany, 1937. Hitler's Reich is celebrating on the Day of German Art. Hitler's Reich rewrites the past. 1,000 years of history under the swastika, according to Hitler, who believes that he is destined to forge a greater German Reich. He is concerned with racial struggles and Lebensraum, victory or doom. These are the cornerstones of his ideology. In 1940, when France had been defeated, Hitler was at the peak of his power. He was once a drifter in Vienna. Now he ruled the continent. But he is still not satisfied. His goal was to expand the Reich all the way to the Urals. Now in Berlin, 1945, it's the end of his illusion. Hitler's ideological war is lost. Germany and large parts of Europe are in ruins. But Hitler has one final goal in mind: to drag the entire nation along into the abyss. Since April 21st, Soviet troops are fighting in the suburbs of Berlin. Stalin has given orders to take Hitler's capital by May 1st and bring the war against the Führer to a triumphant conclusion by Labor Day. The civilian population is crushed between the lines. Hitler is the only obstacle left between them and peace.
I think there are very few people towards the end of the war were still fanatical supporters of Hitler. Perhaps 10% of the population, the guess. But of course amongst them then the most powerful in the land. And for the rest, there were various forms, I think, of behavior or attitude, but in general, people were resigned, I think, largely apathetic, just waiting for the end of the war, and if they thought about Hitler at all, then it was as a hindrance to the end of the war.
The Red Army, with 1.2 million troops, surround the frontline city of Berlin. At the city center, near the Reichstag and the Brandenburg Gate, is the new Chancellery building, completed in 1939 and intended to be a symbol for the power and the glory of the Third Reich. Hitler has been back in Berlin since January 18th. The Reich Chancellery is in ruins. Heavily damaged by Allied bombing. Following the disastrous German winter campaign that had ended outside of Moscow in late 1941, Hitler had ordered Albert Speer's office to build a complex of air raid shelters in the garden of the new Chancellery. The catacomb is divided into two sections, the anti-bunker and the so-called Führer bunker. In the upper part, on the right-hand side, are the staff quarters. Below, almost 33 feet under the surface, is the Führer bunker, with 20 small, sparsely furnished rooms. This is Hitler's living room and study. Here is his bedroom, and Eva Braun's bedroom. SS guard Roke Schmisch is Hitler's bodyguard and telephone operator.
As long as there were briefings, there was life in the bunker. But when the briefing stopped and everybody had left, it was like a concrete, how can I say, it was a concrete coffin.
Seeking shelter from the constant air raids, Hitler has gone underground with his closest staff in mid-February. The rooms are small and sparsely furnished. The bunker was never meant to become the Reich's command center. A hall hallway with the engine room to the right and the radio room. The antechamber of the briefing room and the briefing room itself. In the last 10 days of his life, Hitler would not step outside the bunker. There are conflicting reports of what really happened inside. File number 462, a report on Hitler and his surroundings, furnished by the Soviet Secret Service. This report provides new insights into Hitler's last days inside the bunker. The source of the report are two prisoners, SS Major Otto Gunsche, Hitler's aide-de-camp since February 1944, and Heinz Linge, Hitler's manservant since 1939, shown here on his return from Soviet captivity in 1955. There is only one copy of this Soviet report on Hitler, and it is written for Joseph Stalin.
What is special about the book of Hitler is, on the one hand, that it shows many new circumstances from Hitler's personal surroundings. And what is particularly interesting is how he dealt with the generals, this controversy between Hitler and his own military. It also shows that Hitler was much more personally involved in the persecution of the Jews than previous history has shown. According to these documents, Hitler was presented with two proposals for the gas chambers in 1942. He gave his blessing and then ordered all available support to be provided to the engineers. It is evident that in those final days he was just scraping along, devoid of any energy or drive. He would play with his dog for hours, seemingly absent-minded and completely unable to make any decisions, least of all, how to end it all.
On March 7th, 1945, Hitler pays a final visit to his troops at the front lines. At the 9th Army headquarters on the Oder River, in poor physical and mental health, Hitler still demands his troops fight to their last breath. Nobody argues with him.
Es ging auch aus in seinem kranken Zustande von ihm
as sick as he was, he still had this aura about him.
Diese Wirkung wurde verstärkt.
And this effect was enhanced by a sort of madness. I don't mean that he was foaming from his mouth or started to chew the carpet, as people used to say. These were all mere legends. But there was this exaggerated identification with the German nation. He was convinced that with his own death, and with the death of his ideology, the German people did not have a chance to survive.
This final film shows Hitler on March 20th, 1945 in the Chancellery Garden with the members of the Hitler Youth.
If you combine these two aspects, his pathological arrogance on the one hand, and the almost indescribable, overwhelming effect that he had on people on the other hand, you might begin to understand why so many people followed him up to the very end.
April 20th, 1945 marks Hitler's last birthday. For a final time, Joseph Goebbels praises the dictator in a fanatical tribute.
Das deutsche Volk hat ihn geboren. Es hat ihn auf den Schild erhoben. Es hat ihn sich in freier Wahl zum Führer erkoren. Ein Mann von wahrhaft säkularer Größe, von einem Mut ohnegleichen, von einer Standhaftigkeit, die Herzen erhebt und erschüttert.
The Nazi top brass gathers once more in the Reich Chancellery to celebrate their Führer's 56th birthday. Many of them urge Hitler to leave Berlin, but he wants to stay. He plans to go down right here in Berlin, turning his end into a huge spectacle. These are images of the bunker, shot in 1987, shortly before it is demolished. This is the stage for Hitler's final act. After the celebration is over, most of the Nazi leaders flee from Berlin as fast as they can. Only a few of Hitler's most loyal followers and personal staff remain in the bunker with him. His secretary, Treudel Junge, is there.
Well, it was actually on Hitler's last birthday, on the 20th of April, that the situation became so critical that for the first time we thought we might be defeated, that we might be trapped here in Berlin.
At that time, Soviet shells begin hitting the government district as well. Hitler's manservant, Heinz Linge, wakes him up at 9:30 a.m. on April 21st. He hears gunfire and wants to know if the Russians are that close already. The hits can even be heard clearly in the private quarters in the lower part of the bunker. Hitler knows that the end is near. His only concern now is his place in history.
He thought if he staged this disaster with pomp and circumstance, he would secure an afterlife for himself in legend, folklore. He would not have been a complete failure. He was filled with a whole range of very complex emotions, but they gave him some kind of satisfaction, even at a time when everything was lost.
In February 1945, Hitler is reminiscing over his model of the Austrian city of Linz, which he has with him in the bunker. This is the place where he wants to be buried, in a sarcophagus high above the city, as if on an altar.
On top of it all, he had this sense for drama. And the greatest drama, that much he had learned from Wagner, always ended with the Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, the end of the world. And in this sense, I venture to say, he might have considered his end in Berlin more fitting for himself than, well, what would he have done with a victory? March into New Delhi? Invade Nepal? That was not his place. It was the logical consequence of everything he had ever thought, felt, and wished for.
April 22nd, 3:30 in the afternoon. During a briefing in the bunker, it is noted that Soviet troops have already penetrated the inner line of defense around Berlin. They are now less than 8 miles away from the Reich Chancellery. Bernd Freitag von Loringhoven, an aide-de-camp, is a witness to the crisis meeting from the start.
The situation was disastrous. All of a sudden. And this had never happened before. I know this because I took part in many meetings. Hitler sent out all the aides and said, I want only with me Keitel, Jodl, Krebs and Bormann.
They are Hitler's closest confidants. Martin Bormann, his secretary, Wilhelm Keitel, head of the Wehrmacht Supreme Command, and Alfred Jodl, Chief of Staff at the Wehrmacht Supreme Command. Hitler believes an armored corps under SS Lieutenant General Felix Steiner would be able to repel the Soviet advance. But with only a small troop and no heavy armor, Steiner could accomplish very little. When news reaches the bunker that Steiner's assault would never take place, Hitler is livid.
Hitler had caved in For the first time during that meeting, for the first time he considered the war lost. Krebs told me Hitler had actually cried, but he switched right back into attack mode. It all happened because nobody trusted me. Nobody believed in me. And most of all, because the army generals let me down.
None of the generals inside the bunker object to the war and the senseless killing and dying.
Nobody said a word. Instead, they all ran after Hitler, who was groping his way along the walls of the briefing room with great difficulty. And they said, "You wouldn't want to give up now, my Führer. Victory is at hand." What they told him, of course, was utter nonsense. It only revealed their cowardice and their submissiveness. But it also showed how impressed they were by the great performance that Hitler had staged.
He gives his men permission to leave if they wish. With each day, each hour that passes, Soviet troops move closer to the bunker, but there is still a chance to escape. Hitler wants the women in the bunker to be taken to a safer place, his mountain retreat near Berchtesgaden. But Eva Braun has dedicated her life to Adolf Hitler. She has been the dictator's mistress since 1936. The public does not know about her. She has to keep a low profile. On March 7, 1945, she leaves Berchtesgaden and joins Hitler in Berlin as a sign of loyalty. This is her bedroom in the bunker.
And then Eva Braun told him, "You know, I am going to stay with you." And then he walked over to her and gave her a kiss, which he had never, ever done in front of witnesses. And so the three of us, the secretaries, decided to stay as well.
All that Hitler has on his mind in those days is to keep on fighting. He wants the end of World War II in 1945 to be different from the end of the first in 1918, which had traumatized him all his life.
In the last period, Hitler's chief concern, and it had been a concern of his throughout, was there would be no repeat of 1918. It had been after all, one of the driving forces of his so-called career. No repeat of 1918, absolutely ruled out, and that he would demonstrate that he had stuck it out to the end, fought against the odds. Of course, part of this myth also, betrayed on all sides, let down on all sides, he alone had heroically held out, heroically alone supported by his few faithful people when everybody else was abandoning him, and that this was the image which was to be conveyed to the future generation.
Sometime around March 1945, Hitler orders the sustenance of Germany to be destroyed. The dictator does not want to hear about the mass murder of Jews, the suffering of millions, expulsion, and displacement. In the end, Hitler regards the German people as nothing but
a nation of losers. If the German people is going to lose the war, it will have shown itself as the weaker one, and I will not shed a tear for it. That was 19th century social Darwinism. The weak ones are destroyed, and they deserve to be. And so the Germans deserve to be destroyed.
He wants to expand the military defeat into a total disaster. This last photograph shows Hitler in the ruins of his chancellery. Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda share Hitler's ideas about the twilight of the gods and the fight to the end. On April 22nd, the Goebbels family moves into the bunker along with their 6 children. Magda Goebbels is willing to sacrifice her life and the lives of her children to the ideology of National Socialism. The Goebbels children stay in the upper section of the bunker. Each child is allowed only one toy and some clothes for the night.
And that brought fresh life into the bunker. The kids were free and open, and they found it interesting to be with Uncle Adolf. It was a nice adventure for them.
The bad news keeps coming with increasing frequency. April 23rd, Soviet troops are moving closer and closer with each advancing hour. They have already reached the district of Tegel. And then the bunker community is shaken by a telex from Hermann Goering in Berchtesgaden. Goering has been Hitler's second in command since 1939. If Goering doesn't hear a life sign from Hitler by 2200 hours, he would proclaim himself his successor. Secretary Bormann sees a chance to get rid of Goering, his archenemy. Hitler believes Goering has committed an act of treason and releases him from all his official duties. The circle around Berlin closes on April 25th. Heavy fighting is raging in the streets of the eastern and southern suburbs of the city. The remnants of the Wehrmacht are scattered and dissolved.
We had given up in our minds, but we were not allowed to surrender, as long as the commander-in-chief was telling us to keep fighting, in an irrational hope for victory.
German soldiers are still fighting a hopeless battle of resistance outside of Berlin. Hitler's last hope is the 12th Army under General Walter Wenck, which was supposed to stop the Americans at the Elbe River and is now ordered to make the impossible happen. Wenck receives orders to liberate the capital. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel drives to the front lines and relays the orders to Wenck. He is to liberate Berlin and get the Führer out. Wenck's army actually starts to move toward Berlin to rescue wounded and dispersed soldiers, not to rescue the city. In the briefing room of the bunker, the mood is almost euphoric when the latest news arrives from a region southwest of Berlin.
Wenck's army had reached Ferch.
Hitler
reached for the map, looked at it, and turned towards Krebs, as if he wanted to say, maybe we can make it after all. Krebs adjusted his monocle and said, my Führer, Ferch is not Berlin.
Hitler is hoping for a last-minute rescue, just the way it had happened to Frederick the Great, King of Prussia, back in 1762. He keeps looking up to the portrait of Frederick the Great in his living room and study.
There was still a loss of reality, or at least a clutching at straws, the hope that something would turn up. So whenever there was a glimmer of the slightest bit of good news, Hitler clutched to it like a drowning man clutches at straws and was hoping for the best, until that too turned out to be unreal.
On April 26th at 7 o'clock in the morning, a fine dust gets into the bunker through the ventilation system. The artillery hits are very close now. Soviet artillery is firing a barrage at the government district, but inside the bunker, nobody knows exactly where the Russians are. The bunker has been built without a good communication system. Staff officers phone citizens at random to find out where the Soviet troops are located. At 9 o'clock in the evening of April 28th, the German-language broadcast service of the BBC announces,
Himmler has reportedly offered an unconditional surrender to Great Britain and to the United States but not to the Soviet Union.
Hitler hears the broadcast and is deeply affected by Himmler's act of treason, whom he had always called his loyal Heinrich. Hermann Fegelein is the liaison officer between Himmler and Hitler inside the bunker. A career criminal, as the commander of an SS cavalry brigade, Fegelein had been responsible for the slaughter of more than 10,000 Russian civilians in the Pripyat swamps in 1941. He did not want to stay at the front. He wanted to get into the heart of Nazi power. In September 1943, he got into the Führer headquarters as liaison officer for the SS.
Und dann war das so ein Naturbursch-Typ, der ungeheuer
There was this rough, tough, braggart, swaggerer, but charming in his own way.
Bei Männern und Frauen ist das
Both men and women liked that.
Ich glaube, war bei seinen Kollegen
I
nicht
think
beliebt,
he
aber bei
might
den-
not
bei
have
der
been very
Damenwelt und so
popular
mehr.
with
Der
his colleagues,
hat also wirklich,
but the ladies loved him.
sicherlich
He
ein
was
echter Ladykiller.
a real lady
Und er
killer.
hat auch bei allen, die
And he
unter
tried
80
his
waren,
charm
seinen
on
Charme
anyone
erprobt.
under 80.
Und wer also da nicht
He told me
überlegen ist, da hat er
I was a neuter
zu mir
to
hat er
him,
gesagt, für mich bist du
because
ein Neutrum,
I
weil ich
resisted.
widerstanden habe,
But
aber probiert
I guess he
hätte es
would have
wahrscheinlich
tried.
schon.
On June 3rd, 1944, Fegelein does get closer to Hitler. He marries Gretel Braun, Eva's sister, which made him almost Hitler's brother-in-law. Bormann and Himmler are witnesses to the wedding. Eva Braun wants her sister's wedding to be beautiful, as if it were her own. She was also close to her new brother-in-law. These photos, as Hitler's secretary, Christine Schroeder, commented, tell it all.
Fegelein kam wie üblich
Fegelein used to attend the
mit den anderen
briefings,
zusammen. Und das
but
eine
that
Mal
day he failed to show
hat
up.
Fegelein gefehlt. Und
And
gerade
that was the
am
day
Mittag wollte Hitler
Hitler
was
wanted some
von
information
Fegelein
from
über
him
die
about Himmler's
Himmler-SS oder
SS,
sowas
but
wissen.
Fegelein was nowhere to be found.
SS General Fegelein is concerned for his own safety and slips out of the bunker. He flees to his home in the Charlottenburg district of Berlin. One last time, he calls his sister-in-law inside the bunker and urges Eva to leave the Führer. He tells her it is a matter of life and death. Fegelein knows about Himmler's plans for peace. He is picked up by the Führer escort unit. One of the men was Kurt Larson.
Und da wurde auch ein Kommando abgeteilt.
A special detail was ordered to stop him from escaping.
Er darf die Halle nicht verlassen.
Under no circumstances was he to leave.
Und da habe ich mich
In
dann
other words,
halb
kill him.
angeschlossen.
I joined them more or less by coincidence.
Und da ging's
And
dann
indeed,
nach
within a
einem
few
Minuten
minutes,
war er
he
tatsächlich
tried to
dabei,
escape.
Laufschritt.
And while he was running, with his hands full and pockets full, as we found out later, and then, because he tried to run away, he was shot and killed.
His wife, Gretel, is pregnant. Eva Braun allegedly begs Hitler to spare her brother-in-law. The documents from Moscow also shed new light on the reasons why Fegelein was shot. According to this evidence, it was not Hitler who wants to see him dead, but his aide, Otto Gunscha. The documents claim that Hitler, in fact, wants to spare his life.
Und gerade dagegen wandte sich Günscher
And
als
Gunscher,
SS-Offizier
being an
massiv,
SS officer,
setzte sich
was
bei
vehemently
Hitler
opposed to that.
äußerst,
He
lautstark
urged Hitler
und äußerst
vociferously
vehement
to have Fegelein shot,
während Hitler
whereas Hitler himself had no
eigentlich zu
particular
Fegelein gar keine
relation to
Beziehung hatte und ihn
Fegelein and
quasi
just
laufen
wanted to
lassen
let him
wollte.
escape.
Und das wirft doch auch nochmal auf ein
That
Licht
characterizes
auf
the
die
situation
im
inside the
dass
bunker at
Hitler
the
quasi
time.
die Führung völlig
Hitler had
hinten war und
actually
er
lost
eigentlich
control
vollkommen
and was
teilnahmslos
waiting with
auf den
indifference
weiteren
for
Gang
things
der
to
Ereignisse
develop.
hatte.
Suffering high losses, Soviet divisions fight their way through the ruins of Berlin, block by block, building by building, toward the center. Inside the bunker, the mood is gloomy and apathetic. there is hardly any hope left of escaping from this dungeon alive. Ulrich de Meiser has attended 16 briefings in the bunker.
It was relatively calm. And inside the briefing room, Hitler was standing with Bormann and General Krebs and Burgdorf in front of a large city map of Berlin, reading reports to each other about the house-to-house combat. They focused on the geographical proximity of the fighting to the bunker. This image of the leading people of the Reich in front of a city map of Berlin seemed symbolic and tangible at the same time, indicative of the collapse of the Reich.
Those who surrender too soon are eliminated by SS bloodhounds without mercy. And yet, more and more of the troops give up the pointless fight and would rather go into captivity. On top of the fear, there is hunger. It is now a matter of life and death in the midst of the chaos of the collapse. Inside the bunker, even in Hitler's immediate entourage, there are signs of disintegration. People drink and smoke. Hitler does not care anymore. There is only one topic of conversation.
How should we do this? Shoot ourselves in the mouth or in the head with a pistol? Or should we swallow the capsule? I didn't have a capsule, but the bigwigs had a capsule, of course.
The cyanide comes from Himmler, but Hitler doubts whether it would actually work. He orders the cyanide intended for him to be tested on his German Shepherd Blondie. The cyanide kills Blondie and her puppies.
The whole situation was so depressing, so fatalistic and so macabre. We were all in deep despair. But we would not show it on the outside. We kept it bottled up inside.
On April 29th, the Red Army is less than half a mile from the bunker. Berlin's city commandant, General Weidling, estimates that the Soviets would reach the Reich Chancellery by May 1st at the latest. Hitler knows that the time has come to end it all. But before he commits suicide, he wants to marry Eva Braun. While Hitler still believed in a future, he did not want to tie himself to another person. But now, it is time to reward his mistress for her loyalty. Eva is so shaken that she almost signs the document with her maiden name. For Eva Hitler, née Braun, the wedding band is like an order of merit. This is the original, found in the United States.
And then we were all invited to have a glass of champagne. And as I went into the room, Hitler was standing by the door and said, "Come with me." He went into the next room and said, "I want to dictate my last will and testament to you."
Hitler divides his testament in two parts, an extensive political one and a much shorter personal one.
At that point, I thought, now I am going to find out why this war is ending the way it is, and why things went the way they did.
But Hitler's will is a document of self-righteousness and unrestrained hatred for the Jews. He never wanted the war, Hitler dictates. Others were to blame. Berlin, April 29, 1945, 4 o'clock.
No regrets, no explanations why he had not surrendered. The testament was one huge disappointment for me.
At the same time, in Dachau, near Munich, these are the scenes from the concentration camp liberated by the U.S. Army. The oldest of these camps in Germany. The liberators get a first-hand impact of Hitler's racist rage in all its brutality. In Dachau alone, more than 30,000 people were murdered. Inside the bunker, there is one last irrational glimpse of hope. April 29th, 11 o'clock at night. Hitler sends a radio message to find out the location of Wenck's army.
Ja, der hat bei uns überhaupt keine Wirkung.
That had absolutely no effect on us.
Der kam halt.
It just came in,
Genauso wie Flugblätter
just
kamen.
like the flyers came.
Wo ist Wenck und all diese
Where is Wenck?
Das wurde alles
We just
verbrannt.
burned that
Da ist
message.
gar nichts
There was
geschehen.
no action.
4 hours later, Hitler is informed about the hopeless situation. He says goodbye to his closest staff in the conference hall. Tomorrow, Hitler predicts, he will be cursed by millions. April 30th, 1945, around 3:30, inside the bunker. Hitler and his wife Eva retreat to the living quarters. A short time later, a shot is heard. Hitler is dead. Millions of people are killed during Hitler's reign. That shot signals the end of the life of one of the worst criminals of the 20th century. Arthur Axmann describes the room inside the bunker beneath the Chancellery of the Reich where Hitler died.
Adolf Hitler
was sitting on the right side of the sofa. His upper body was slanted slightly to one side.
Der Kopf etwas
The head
nach hinten
was tilted back.
Stirn
His entire face
waren
was
auffällig
extremely
weiß
white,
und von seiner Schläfe
and from his temple,
lief
blood was slowly running down
Zahl
his face.
Hitler Youth leader Arthur Axmann is one of only 3 witnesses who had seen Hitler dead and who has survived the war. Information about the actual situation is contradictory and leads to legends and speculations. SS aide-de-camp Otto Gunsche claims the corpse was not sitting on the sofa, but in an armchair with a wound in the right temple. Hitler's manservant, Heinz Linge, claims the body was leaning against the left side of the sofa and there were bloodstains on the right temple. The question is, did Hitler pull the trigger himself? On several occasions, he had said that his hands were shaking so much he couldn't hold the pistol. And if he was just wounded, none of his staff would be willing to pull the trigger for him. Did Hitler take the cyanide capsule first before he shot himself?
Hitler wanted to be absolutely certain he was going to be dead and not end up like some of the generals after the great coup d'etat, who had shot themselves in the head, but not killed themselves.
Hitler had consulted SS surgeon Ernst Günther Schenk for some professional advice.
He only asked what would be the best method. And I replied, hydrogen cyanide. I already knew about the capsules that existed. The Army Medical Service had been ordered to produce them in great quantities since November 1944. I don't know for whom. But when I said that, it was purely theoretical, with no specific purpose.
Hitler wanted to guarantee his own death. His last will stated, "I don't want to fall into the hands of the Russians." Today, there is no more doubt that Hitler shot himself. Linga's and Guncha's statements in Moscow have answered the question once and for all. The corpses of Adolf and Eva Hitler are cremated in the garden of the Reich Chancellery. Official Nazi propaganda calls it a heroic death.
The Führer's headquarters has announced that our Führer Adolf Hitler this afternoon at his headquarters at the Reichskanzlei fought against Bolshevism until his last breath, died for Germany.
The war lasts another week. Joseph Goebbels and his family are still in the bunker. Magda Goebbels is a fervent supporter of Hitler and has the resolve to go to extremes.
I once talked to her, and she said there was no other solution. She did not want the children to suffer after the war. She could not have imagined that any kind of life would be possible for the kids. And she said it was the toughest decision of her life, but she had to go through with it. And she stayed very quiet, and I hardly ever saw her again. She stayed in her room. Maybe it was hard for her to look them in the eyes.
With the help of Hitler's physician, Dr. Ludwig Stumpfeiger, Magda Goebbels poisons her children with cyanide. A little later, she and Joseph shoot themselves. Soldiers of the Soviet Secret Service discovered the bodies of the Goebbels family. But the most important question for them is, what has happened to Adolf Hitler? It takes the Soviets days to find parts of a corpse and teeth that can be matched with Hitler's without the shadow of a doubt. Later, at the same location, another discovery is made.
At the location where Hitler's corpse had been dug up a year earlier, the fact-finding committee found parts of the back of a skull with clearly visible traces of an exit wound. On the basis of this evidence, the forensic experts concluded that the trajectory of the gunshot went from the front to the rear and from the bottom to the top of the skull. And that is more or less conclusive evidence that Hitler shot himself.
Red Army troops find a body that bears a striking resemblance to Hitler. For days, there have been rumors about Hitler's end. His death becomes a political issue that has fascinated countless historians, journalists, and millions of ordinary people around the world ever since.
In this way, there's a fascination with Hitler, and the bunker episode, I think, is one element of this, that here's this really macabre end. It does seem as if you've written a script for it, and it ends up with Götterdämmerung and with this, they're all going up in flames in the bunker. If you have been trying to write a film, this is how you would have wanted it to end, I presume, a film about Hitler. But this is not film, it's reality, and the reality has to be borne in mind why we're having that. So I still retain the notion that this was, in reality, a shabby, sordid end. But of course, the story that built up to it is one of the greatest importance for the history not just of Germany, but of Europe and the world. And that's why, again, there is worldwide fascination in Hitler, not just national fascination in him.
Most of Hitler's bunker has been blown up after the war. The communist regime in Eastern Germany takes care of the rest. Today, a residential neighborhood covers the site where Hitler was once cremated, and nearby stands a memorial for the Holocaust.
Aztecs, mesmerized by his guns, horses, and metal armor, mistook Cortez for a god as he hellishly annihilated their empire. The Conquerors, Cortez, Conqueror of Mexico, next on the History Channel.